Think about the last time you woke up just gasping for air, like completely convinced that some shadowy, I don't know, incomprehensible monster was actively crushing your
Oh, like
chest.
that classic night terror feeling.
Exactly. And the standard response is to just brush it off as this neurochemical glitch, a temporary misfiring of your visual cortex while your whole system reboots.
Yeah, we tend to think the brain is just emptying its cache with
Yeah.
generating all this random narrative static.
Right, but modern clinical data is pointing to something far more profound. Like, what if the monsters in your nightmares aren't actually trying to kill you?
Which is a wild shift in perspective.
It really is, because often they are quite literally trying to restart your breathing. That terrifying, completely surreal hallucination you're having, it's actually this highly structured, symbolic rescue mission. And the director of this movie is your own biology.
And that's what happens when you take a single, continuous, highly complex nightmare and put it under the microscope.
Exactly. And that is our mission for today's deep dive.
Mm.
We are tearing apart a singular, meticulously documented clinical case study of a nightmare.
And this isn't your run-of-the-mill, falling from a great height or losing your teeth kind of dream.
Oh, no, not at all. We have an incredibly detailed psychological and physiological analysis here. We're talking about a multi-layered descent into madness involving corporate bankruptcy, vertical climbing inflamed walruses.
Which we will definitely get to.
Yeah, we have to. Plus Elon Musk and, weirdly, a plastic toothbrush. We are going to decode the associative chains the brain uses to convert real-world financial ruin, toxic family dynamics, and actual physiological distress into this nightly cinema.
It's basically the ultimate true crime investigation, but the scene of the crime is this person's subconscious mind.
I love that framing. So have you ever wondered why your brain tortures you in your sleep? Let's get into it. Set the stage for us. Where does this whole ordeal actually start?
So the narrative begins exactly where the ego is supposed to be entirely off-duty, which is the dreamer's own bedroom.
Right, the ultimate safe space.
Exactly. But the baseline parameter of safety is just immediately violated. The dreamer falls asleep and, quote-unquote, wakes up within the dream to find their personal bedroom has been totally retrofitted. It's now the office of a failing business that they manage.
Wow. So the sanctuary is just completely commercialized and compromised right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's the ultimate destruction of the secure base.
You don't even get the commute to dread going to the office. The economic anxiety has essentially colonized your physical space of rest.
Right. And the dream populates this corrupted space immediately. There's an employee present, but it's an avatar. It's a former classmate that the dreamer barely tolerates in waking life.
Oh, man. I think we all have one of those.
For sure. And this classmate, along with a faceless colleague, they're openly judging the dreamer's gross mismanagement. Like they're visibly disgusted, they're slacking off, they quit on the spot, and in the background, formal eviction proceedings are already underway.
Okay, so wait. The classmate acting as the employee, why them specifically?
Notice the specific deployment of what we call projective identification here. The dreamer is undergoing a catastrophic collapse of professional competence, right?
Right, the business is failing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But rather than processing that ego-dystonic realization directly, which, by the way, would cause immediate psychological fragmentation, the subconscious offloads all that disgust onto an emotionally distant peer.
Oh, I see. So the classmate's contempt is actually the dreamer's own internal judgment, just, localized outside the self.
Precisely. And the eviction is the structural consequence of that.
Yeah.
The psyche is essentially filing for psychological bankruptcy. The ego no longer possesses the collateral to maintain its own internal architecture.
Man, that is bleak. Which brings in this whole forensic accounting aspect of the nightmare, because as this eviction is looming, the dreamer starts finding these incredibly messy, disorganized stacks of documents scattered around the room.
The paper trail of guilt.
Yeah. And the terror here isn't just that the room is a mess. It's the realization that these documents constitute irrefutable evidence of the dreamer's laziness. It literally feels like their internal architecture is actively building a legal case against them to justify the eviction.
Because the superego rarely misses an opportunity to act as a punitive prosecutor, especially during a crisis of confidence.
So it's like a toxic internal micromanager, just auditing your brain.
That's a great way to put it. In waking life, you might successfully rationalize your procrastination or your business failures through external factors, blaming the market or the economy.
Right, finding excuses.
But in the REM state, the superego strips all those rationalizations away. It manufactures physical evidence of your intrinsic flaws. Those messy documents are a materialization of profound guilt. The internal auditor is creating this paper trail to ensure the punishment feels entirely justified.
Just digging through the trash to find that one missing receipt they need to fire you with cause.
Exactly. But the corporate hostility is honestly just the opening act here.
Yeah, because then the dream pivots to weaponize the family dynamic, which is so much worse. The dreamer's father materializes, and he's lounging comfortably on the dreamer's bed.
Which is a huge boundary violation.
Completely.
Yeah.
And instead of offering paternal shelter from this ongoing bankruptcy, the father is laughing. He is gleefully, methodically explaining the legal destruction of the business, just mocking the failure.
And the dreamer's reaction.
The dreamer is screaming for him to stop, begging him to take the devastation seriously, but the father is entirely impervious to it.
The spatial positioning here is just critical to understand. The bed represents the absolute nexus of physical and psychological vulnerability.
It's where you sleep, it's where you're unprotected.
Right. So for the father, who is supposed to be the primary archetypal figure of protection and validation, to occupy that specific terrain while inflicting overt emotional cruelty, it points toward deeply unhealed relational trauma.
So it's not just about the business failing anymore.
No, the dynamic playing out is a textbook manifestation of learned helplessness. The dreamer's screaming protests represent an infantile regression. They are reenacting this foundational emotional reality where no amount of vocalized distress could alter the parental figure's dismissive behavior.
Wow. The boundaries are so thoroughly breached that the father has basically set up camp on the bed just to watch the ship sink.
It is devastating.
But then the maternal intrusion happens, and somehow that feels infinitely more violating.
Oh, absolutely.
So the mother enters, ostensibly to help liquidate assets to survive the bankruptcy. She rummages through the dreamer's remaining possessions and fixates on this old, rusty iron rack. Like, it used to have a pristine steel coating, but now it's degraded.
A very specific object.
Yeah, and the dreamer is desperate to sell it. It's basically their last piece of viable capital. But the mother unilaterally decides to donate it to a local elementary school instead.
Of course she does.
She frames this entirely as an act of philanthropy, just insisting the children will love it, completely ignoring the dreamer's enraged protests that they literally need the money to survive. So I have to ask you, why does the mother's seemingly kind act of charity feel like a worse attack than the father's outright mockery?
It comes down to the symbolism of the rust. That iron rack, once shiny and steel-coated but now oxidized and degraded, represents the dreamer's former potential.
Like past talents or a degraded legacy.
Exactly. It has lost its luster, yes, but it remains the dreamer's intrinsic property. It is their last line of defense against total ruin. When the mother expropriates that asset under the guise of charity, she is committing a catastrophic theft of agency.
It's the weaponization of altruism.
That's exactly what it is. The father's attack is a frontal assault, right? You can brace for overt mockery, you know what it is.
Or he's just being mean.
But the mother's actions completely invalidate the dreamer's survival imperative, all while allowing her to perform the role of the benevolent savior, but using someone else's lifeblood to do it.
That is so insidious.
It communicates a devastating underlying belief. Your survival needs are secondary to my social performance. By giving the rack away for free, the mother's avatar in the dream confirms the dreamer's deepest fear.
Which is what? That they're worthless.
That their remaining talents, and by extension their core self, possess zero market value. It's a covert narcissistic exploitation, which triggers a far more intense rage than the father's transparent hostility.
Okay, so familial sanctuary is just entirely radioactive at this point. The dream engine recognizes the internal base is compromised, so it ejects the dreamer into the broader societal landscape.
We shift from personal family trauma to social inferiority.
Exactly. The setting aggressively shifts from this claustrophobic bedroom to a vast, chic, brutalist concrete building complex at night. It's hyper-modern, it's artistically lit, and the dreamer is standing at the top of a tilted, wet spiral ramp.
A very specific architectural choice by the brain.
Very. And attempting to salvage some shred of dignity, the dreamer notices 4 young, attractive women nearby, so they deliberately execute this smooth, stylized slide down the wet concrete to show off.
The environment shift here reflects a desperate pivot to a compensation mechanism. The private sphere has just annihilated their self-worth.
So they go looking for it publicly.
Right. The ego attempts to extract validation from the public sphere. The chic, brutalist architecture represents the cold, hyper-competitive nature of modern capitalism. And that stylized slide is pure performance art for the ego.
But the architecture of the dream won't allow the compensation to hold. A downward spiral, particularly a wet one, it just screams of a descent into the eye, doesn't it?
Oh, a literal descent into the unconscious.
Yeah, I mean, you can perform all the acrobatics you want, but the vector is undeniably downward. And to twist the knife, as they slide, the dreamer looks back up the ramp and sees a specific friend. Someone they actively disdained in waking life for being clumsy and socially inept.
The unwanted friend.
Right. Yet this clumsy friend is somehow perched high above on a solid concrete block, effortlessly courting the very women the dreamer was trying to impress. And the friend just looks down and mocks the dreamer's total lack of experience.
That visual perfectly encapsulates the architecture of an inferiority complex. It's the visceral terror of social displacement.
The fear that everyone else is moving up while you spiral down.
Exactly. The dreamer feels the inevitability of their own downward trajectory, while simultaneously perceiving that everyone else, even the people they deemed completely incompetent, has magically bypassed the struggle and secured the high ground.
And the friend's mockery.
It's just the voice of the dreamer's own comparative anxiety. He's confirming that the whole performance on the slide was transparent and pathetic.
Which deposits them at the absolute bottom. Literally.
Okay.
The spiral terminates at a dead end, blocked by a chain link fence.
Nowhere left to slide.
Nowhere. And sitting in the damp corner of this dead end is a deeply weird tableau. There's this blue, squishy nylon ball that generates its own localized gravitational pull.
Very surreal.
And drawn into this orbit is a fat, perfectly round, green and black frog.
The sticky frog.
The sticky frog. The dreamer is hit with this wave of intense, visceral disgust. They try to punt the frog away like a soccer ball, but the psychic gravity of that blue sphere is too strong. The frog just floats back through the air and aggressively sticks to the dreamer's body.
Amphibians, particularly frogs, are deeply entrenched archetypes for metamorphosis.
Because they transform from tadpoles.
Yes, and they straddle two worlds, water and land, the unconscious and the conscious. The dreamer is trapped at the bottom of the spiral, and the only viable mechanism to escape a psychological dead end is radical transformation. But the dreamer violently rejects the catalyst.
I hate the frog.
Right. Kicking the floating frog away represents the dreamer desperately trying to reject their own flaws or the need for change. But the anxiety is sticky. It's impossible to shake off.
I feel like we've all had that sticky frog of anxiety, like an unread email or a tough conversation you keep ignoring, but it just floats right back into your face.
It always does.
But I want to push you on something here. If the brain is directing this, why create the dead end in the first place? Why build a literal trap at the bottom of the spiral?
The dead end forces the confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
The subconscious builds the fence specifically because the waking ego is highly proficient at evasion.
Ah, so if there was no fence...
If the ramp continued, the dreamer would simply keep sliding, keep deflecting. The blue ball represents the inescapable density of their own complex. You cannot outrun the gravity of your own unintegrated flaws.
And the frog sticking to them.
The frog sticks because it belongs to the dreamer. It is the unrefined, ugly truth they must swallow to initiate the metamorphosis.
But of course, the ego refuses to swallow the frog. Instead, it scrambles over the chain link fence, fleeing the dead end and seeking shelter in the next construct, which is a massive 3-story mansion made entirely of exposed concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass.
A very revealing choice of architecture.
Right. It's a structure of immense luxury, but it basically functions as a panopticon. Everyone outside can see every single movement happening within.
We are witnessing the rapid deployment of fragile narcissism as a defense mechanism here. Having failed to manage the unconscious at the bottom of the spiral, the psyche constructs an illusion of grandiose superiority.
The glass house.
The glass house is the ultimate false defense. It projects wealth, status, and impenetrable boundaries to the outside world, but its structural integrity is entirely brittle. It offers zero authentic privacy. The dreamer is attempting to hide in plain sight. They're substituting true psychological security with superficial aesthetic dominance.
And the contrast with the outside world really highlights that fragility, because in the expansive yard of this glass mansion, the dream spawns these ultimate avatars of physical mastery. Top-tier athletes are casually lingering around, and the dreamer specifically identifies Mike Tyson.
The literal heavyweight.
Yeah, and Tyson is looking up at the sky, so the dreamer traces his gaze, expecting perhaps a moment of profound revelation. But instead, the sky is just this flat, oppressive, stagnant gray void.
The gray sky is so important.
And then suddenly, a paratrooper drops into the yard, executing this hyper-technical, flawless landing. Everyone applauds, but the dreamer is just frozen, spectating.
The introduction of Tyson in the paratrooper represents the ego ideal in stark relief against the dreamer's baseline dysthymia.
Meaning their underlying depression.
Exactly. Tyson embodies raw, kinetic dominance, the exact antithesis of the dreamer's helplessness. The paratrooper represents surgical precision and total control over one's descent, which directly contrasts with the dreamer's chaotic slide down the wet ramp earlier.
It's almost as if the brain is loading these tutorial modules on how to survive, but the dreamer lacks the permissions to execute the software. They can only watch.
Yes, they are entirely passive.
And that stagnant gray sky feels like the overarching neurochemical reality asserting itself. You can render all the idealized muscular avatars you want in the yard, but the persistent weather system of the mind remains deeply depressed.
Exactly. The gray void nullifies the fantasy of strength, and the environment quickly turns hostile. The dreamer receives an ambient warning that the yard is no longer safe. They're instructed to seek cover in the back of a pragmatic, unglamorous delivery truck idling nearby.
Right, a very practical escape.
But just as they commit to this utilitarian escape route, an anonymous figure swoops in, grabs a box, and claims the dreamer's spot.
The subconscious is systematically stripping away every viable exit vector. The truck represents a functional, working-class escape, right? Putting your head down and grinding your way out of the crisis.
But the dreamer's internalized victimhood insists that even the most basic opportunities will inevitably be usurped by someone more decisive.
Man, so deprived of the truck, they retreat inside the glass mansion. They attempt to assimilate with the athletes, mimicking normalcy, eating and drinking. And then the burglar alarm triggers.
The breach happens.
Yes. In a fraction of a second, the idealized protectors, Tyson, the athletes, vaporize. The dreamer is entirely isolated. They sprint through the mansion, desperately throwing the locks on the glass doors. But the moment the hardware engages, the locks autonomously rotate and click back open.
The autonomous unlocking is one of the most chilling structural failures in the entire clinical record we're looking at.
It's terrifying. But if the brain is trying to protect itself, why does it conjure up a glass house and broken locks? Why does the subconscious intentionally sabotage its own security systems?
Because it signifies the absolute collapse of internal defense architecture. The threat is not an external hostile force. It is the dreamer's own repressed anxiety demanding entry.
Oh, wow.
You cannot barricade a door against your own neurology. The brain intentionally sabotages the locking mechanism to force the conscious mind to accept the futility of its compartmentalization. The alarm shatters the illusion of the ego ideal, and the failure of the locks confirms that the glass house was always a tomb, not a fortress.
Which brings us to the uncanny valley of the invasion. Through those unlocked doors, this thick, viscous, almost gelatinous water begins flooding the open concept ground floor. It rises with this sluggish, suffocating inevitability.
And then the creatures arrive.
Yeah, emerging from this sludge are 5 massive, red, violently inflamed walruses. They swim to the exposed concrete pillars of the interior, and in a complete violation of physics, these heavy, cumbersome marine mammals use their flippers to scale the vertical pillars, inching upward just ahead of the rising water.
The imagery here operates at the intersection of absurdity and profound somatic horror. Whale walruses.
Right.
They are creatures of heavy mass and blubber. They are entirely devoid of the anatomical capacity to grip vertical concrete.
Let alone climate.
Exactly. And the fact that they are red and covered in sores suggests acute inflammation, disease, or a heavy physiological burden.
It's the suspension of biological and physical laws that makes it so terrifying. If a predator is hunting you, like a wolf or a bear, you can calculate its velocity and geometry. But when an inflamed 2-ton marine mammal starts climbing a wall like a spider, logic is dead. It's an unstoppable, unnatural intrusion.
It is the perfect visual translation of how clinical anxiety operates. Anxiety does not respect the rational boundaries you build. The viscous nature of the water mimics the heavy, cognitive slowing of severe stress. It's a suffocating medium, not a cleansing one.
And the walruses?
The walruses represent the heavy, ugly, painful realities of the dreamer's waking life that completely defy compartmentalization. No matter how high the dreamer attempts to elevate themselves within their fragile glass narcissism, the inflamed consequences of their reality will simply crawl up the architecture to meet them.
Mind-blowing. And as the walruses ascend, the floor completely drops out. The glass mansion construct collapses, and we plunge into the deepest stratum of the dream space.
The ultimate underground.
Yes, the underground dome, which honestly acts as a terrifying spatial representation of late-stage capitalism. The transition places the dreamer in a round, glass-walled observation room. Inside are two administrative clerks, women in their 40s or 50s, and their behavioral responses are diametrically opposed.
What are they doing?
One clerk is blissfully swimming laps in an adjacent pool, completely insulated from reality. The other is practically vibrating with terror, screaming that the masked robbers who triggered the previous alarm have breached the perimeter.
This staging area reveals a schizoid splitting of the psyche under catastrophic stress. The two clerks are fractured components of the dreamer's own mind.
Okay, break that down for me.
The clerk in the pool represents pure regressive escapism. Submerging in controlled, clear water is an attempt to simulate a womb-like state of sensory deprivation, entirely denying the crisis.
Just floating away from the problems.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the terrified clerk represents the hypervigilant amygdala, paralyzed by the anticipation of imminent violence. The dreamer is caught in the crossfire of these two maladaptive coping mechanisms.
And the hypervigilance is justified because the robbers do breach the room. They are these faceless, heavily armored tactical units. The dreamer abandons the fragmented clerks and escapes into the main chamber of the dome.
What does it look like?
It's a staggering subterranean industrial complex. 4 stories of dirty, massive pipes, catwalks, and suspended half-spheres. The dreamer scrambles up the pipework, pressing themselves into the shadows near the ceiling, adopting this desperate Spider-Man evasion tactic.
Clinging to the walls.
Right. But the tactical units below are methodical. They are firing up into the rafters, and regardless of how perfectly the dreamer conceals themselves behind the infrastructure, the robbers possess an omniscient awareness of their coordinates. The psychological bullets are constantly grazing them.
Notice how the spatial dynamics have inverted again. Earlier, the dreamer sought elevation in the glass mansion to project superiority. Now they are clinging to the ceiling of a subterranean cavern, merely to survive.
It's purely animalistic survival at this point.
Yes. The Spider-Man tactic is the ego expending massive amounts of kinetic energy just to delay the inevitable. And the robber's omniscient targeting system is a crucial detail.
Oh, so.
The tactical units are manifestations of the superego, armed and authorized to execute judgment. You cannot hide from an assassin that shares your central nervous system.
Oh, man. They know exactly where you are because they are you.
Exactly. The bullets are the internalized shame regarding the bankruptcy and the familial failure.
The evasion is unsustainable, so the dreamer scans the subterranean levels for a fortified safe room. They locate a reinforced door, but it's occupied.
By who?
The room has been commandeered by Shohei Ohtani and a cadre of elite baseball players.
Wow.
Yeah, they are deep in an exclusive high-stakes meeting. The sociological barrier is impenetrable. The dreamer is locked out, deemed unworthy of the sanctuary reserved for actualized, universally adored icons of success.
It is the brutal reinforcement of the dreamer's exclusion from the meritocracy. Ohtani represents the apex of discipline, talent, and social capital. Literally everything the dreamer's failing corporate venture lacks.
The ultimate winner.
Right. The subconscious uses this cultural icon as the bouncer to the safe room, explicitly confirming that security is a luxury afforded only to the triumphant.
And the dream expands that concept into a breathtaking, horrific panorama. Because through the glass ceiling of the industrial dome, the dreamer can see an elevated penthouse suite.
What's happening up there?
Up there, an Elon Musk archetype is holding court with these slick, ultra-wealthy young tech executives. They are casually discussing global business and market dominance against the backdrop of a gleaming, futuristic city skyline. They are entirely insulated, floating in the stratosphere of capital.
A total contrast to the dome.
Completely. Because when the dreamer looks down, beneath the pipes, the foundation of the dome is flooding with this putrid, muddy, gray sludge. And churning within this toxic water are massive, writhing, snake-like worms. The dreamer is pinned exactly between these two realities.
It is a masterful, devastating spatial geometry of modern alienation. The dream has constructed the vertical hierarchy of the socioeconomic food chain.
The winners at the top, the losers at the bottom.
Exactly. At the zenith, the untouchable elite operate in sterilized safety, orchestrating the world unbothered by gravity. At the nadir, the primordial terror of total degradation. The muddy water and the parasitic worms represent the absolute bottom of the hierarchy: starvation, disease, the loss of human dignity.
And the dreamer is stuck in the middle.
But they recognize they are losing their grip on the pipes, slipping away from the penthouse reality and plunging toward the parasitic underclass.
It's fascinating how the subconscious synthesizes the anxieties of the digital age. You know, Elon Musk, Shohei Ohtani, global markets, with these ancient evolutionary fears of mud and serpents. Your Twitter feed and your lizard brain are essentially co-directing the nightmare.
It's a perfect storm of modern and primal fear.
But the grip fails. The dreamer descends and the muddy water rises to their feet. We enter the final phase. The dreamer is corralled back into the round room with the remaining constructs, and the terrified clerk steps forward and proposes a radical shift in strategy.
What does she suggest?
She suggests that instead of cowering outwardly, fighting the rising sludge, they should all turn inward, face each other, and form a tight circle to await their end.
Ah, this is the initiation of Jungian shadow integration at the very edge of ego death.
Shadow integration.
Yes. Throughout the entire narrative, the dreamer's primary defense mechanism has been evasion, projection, or futile resistance. Sliding away, hiding behind glass, clinging to pipes. The clerk's proposal represents the psyche finally collapsing its defensive perimeter.
And it works in this bizarre, profound way. Because surprisingly, the armored robbers lower their weapons, the ruthless businessmen step down, the enemies and the allies alike join hands in this inward-facing circle.
At the moment of absolute annihilation, the internal civil war becomes irrelevant. The ego concedes that the tactical units, the elite athletes, the terrified clerk, and the mocking father are all just localized fragments of the same neurological network.
They're all the same person.
Exactly. The boundaries dissolve. The shadow is integrated not through triumph, but through the shared recognition of inevitable destruction.
But the subconscious has one final, absurd masterpiece of censorship to deploy.
It usually does.
Right before the water overtakes them, the clerk says they need to place an object of absolute purity in the center of the circle to protect their souls. She suggests the dreamer's actual, real-life deceased brother.
A very powerful emotional anchor.
Right, and the dreamer feels this profound wave of longing for their brother's pure memory. They look to the center of the ring, expecting to see their sibling, but instead, sitting on the floor in the center of the circle is a literal plastic toothbrush.
A displacement.
Okay, wait. A toothbrush? How does the human brain make the leap from a beloved deceased sibling to dental hygiene? I'm looking at this displacement theory, and I get how the mind censors trauma, but a plastic toothbrush standing in for a deceased sibling feels like the subconscious is just misfiring completely. Walk me through the actual associative chain there.
It sounds like a glitch, I know. But it is actually a highly sophisticated application of Freudian displacement designed to prevent an immediate psychological rupture.
Oh, so?
The dreamer is facing an agonizing, filthy demise subversion in toxic, worm-infested mud. They require an archetype of absolute purity and uncorrupted love to anchor their psyche in those final moments. The deceased brother holds that emotional weight, that emotional cathexis.
So why not just show the brother?
Because conjuring the literal face of a dead loved one, while the dreamer is actively experiencing a simulated death, would result in an emotional payload too massive for the sleeping brain to process. It would shatter the dream state prematurely through sheer grief.
So the system strips the raw emotional data and attaches it to a proxy object based on utility.
Precisely. The brain searches its database for an object associated with purification, routine, and the warding off of decay. A toothbrush is the daily instrument of cleansing.
Wow.
The subconscious fuses the concept of the brother's spiritual purity with the utility of the toothbrush. It creates a symbol that carries the necessary protective resonance without triggering the devastating grief associated with the brother's actual image.
It is an incredibly poignant mechanism when you decode it like that. A desperate grasp for moral sanitation as the mud rises.
It's beautiful in a tragic way.
It is. So the group takes their final defensive action. They strip off their hoodies and link the fabric together, stretching it tightly across each other's backs to form a continuous flimsy barrier against the sludge.
The linked hoodies act as what we call the skin ego. It is the final, millimeter-thin membrane separating the integrated self from the annihilating environment.
Everything else is gone.
Right. The glass walls, the concrete blocks, the locked doors, all previous architectural defenses have fallen. They are down to the bare textile boundary of the self.
And the membrane fails. The muddy water presses against the fabric. The dreamer feels the intense, hyper-realistic weight of the giant bacteria and the wriggling worms pressing directly against their spine through the wet hoodie. The somatic detail here is described as absolute skin-crawling agony.
The physical sensation is peaking.
And then the water surges up, it covers their chest, their throat, their face. Oxygen is cut off, the lungs begin to burn, and in the final microsecond before the simulation registers death, the dreamer's conscious mind violently forces its way through the barrier. They scream internally, "This is a dream, open your eyes." They rip themselves out of the paralysis and wake up in their bed, gasping for air, heart rate exploding.
That phenomenon is an emergency forced awakening, often referred to as a dream exit.
A dream exit.
Yes. The psychological terror finally intersected with the actual physiological limit of the organism. The brain realized the narrative was about to cross the threshold into simulating biological death, so it triggered a massive systemic dump of adrenaline. It's a neurochemical override to force the prefrontal cortex online and abort the REM state.
And this is the moment we pull the curtain back on The Wizard of Oz. We have spent this entire deep dive unpacking the intricate psychoanalysis of the walruses, the brutalist architecture, the toothbrush displacement. But clinical sleep physiology provides an entirely different parallel architecture for why this specific nightmare with these exact sensory details culminated in drowning.
To really understand this, we have to look at the neurochemical environment of REM sleep.
Let's do it.
During the REM phase, when narrative dreaming is most intense, the lateral prefrontal cortex, which is the region responsible for executive function, logic, and reality testing, is almost entirely suppressed. It's completely offline.
It's shut down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, the amygdala, which processes fear and emotional salience, and the hippocampus, which catalogs memory, are highly active. They are running at maximum capacity.
So the fear center is redlining, the memory bank is wide open, but the logic center is closed.
Right.
There's no bouncer at the door of the club to say, "Hey, heavy marine mammals can't scale vertical concrete." The system just accepts the data as real.
Exactly. And the most critical mechanism at play here is called somatic incorporation.
Somatic incorporation.
Yes. While the logic center is offline, the autonomic nervous system is still rigorously monitoring your physical environment and your body's vital signs. If a somatic event occurs, like a sudden temperature drop, a noise, or a shift in your respiration, the brain detects it.
Okay, but it doesn't know what it is.
Right. Because the prefrontal cortex cannot rationally identify the source, the amygdala hijacks the sensation. It demands that the dream generation engine instantly weave it into the ongoing narrative to explain the distress.
Which violently reframes the climax of this entire nightmare. The suffocating mud, the viscous water rising over the face, the desperate, burning need for oxygen. What is actually happening to the physical body in the bed while the avatar in the dream is drowning in the underground dome?
Given the intense, specific clinical markers of suffocation, viscous fluid, and the panic-driven forced awakening, the clinical probability is exceptionally high that the dreamer was experiencing an episode of sleep apnea.
Wow.
Yes, a severe transient occlusion of the airway.
So wait, the dreamer wasn't just abstractly mourning the collapse of late-stage capitalism. Their physical airway collapsed. They had literally stopped breathing.
Yes. In an apneic event, the oxygen desaturation triggers the brainstem's primitive survival protocol. The biological alarm sounds, "We are dying of hypoxia."
But the conscious mind is asleep.
Exactly. So the amygdala receives this raw terror signal and hands it directly to the dream director. The subconscious instantly constructs the most universally understood archetype for hypoxia, which is drowning in thick, heavy sludge. The narrative of the muddy water wasn't merely a psychological metaphor for corporate failure. It was a desperate, literal rescue mission. The dream was amplifying the terror to force the body to wake up and breathe.
That is incredible. The nightmare is a biological fire alarm wrapped in psychological set dressing.
It really is.
And this somatic incorporation, it explains the other sensory anomalies too, doesn't it? Like the intense skin-crawling sensation of the giant worms pressing against the back through the hoodie.
Oh, absolutely. That highly localized tactile hallucination is rarely a spontaneous psychological invention. It is almost certainly the misinterpretation of physical stimuli.
Like what?
It could be a sudden localized draft altering the skin temperature, the friction of the bed linen shifting, or most likely myoclonus.
What's myoclonus?
Those are the involuntary muscle spasms that occur during sleep transitions. A localized muscle twitch in the back, say the latissimus dorsi, is detected by the sleeping brain. The amygdala panics, And the dream engine translates a harmless muscle spasm into a parasitic worm boring into the spine.
Oh my God. And the Spider-Man sequence, when the dreamer was clinging to the pipes feeling incredibly heavy, unable to execute a fluid escape while the tactical units fired at them. I mean, we have all experienced that molasses running phenomenon in our nightmares.
That is the direct narrative translation of rematonia.
Rematonia.
Right. During REM sleep, the brain actively paralyzes the major motor neurons to prevent the body from thrashing around and acting out the dream. It's a safety mechanism.
So you don't jump out of bed and run into a wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, if the dreamer's consciousness drifts too close to the waking threshold, they become faintly aware of this paralysis. The dream engine incorporates the inability to move the physical legs into the narrative, and that results in the avatar feeling sluggish, or magnetized to the walls, or trapped in viscous gravity.
It is a breathtaking psychophysiological synthesis. The unresolved trauma, the failing business, the toxic parental dynamics, the social displacement that provides the script, the characters, and the aesthetic architecture.
The set dressing, exactly.
But the actual biological distress, the sleep apnea, the myoclonus, the rematonia, that dictates the pacing, the tactile special effects, and the ultimate climax of the film.
It really highlights the supreme efficiency of the human brain. It does not waste a crisis. It utilizes the apneic event to simultaneously process the psychological backlog of the day. It's a dual-purpose survival mechanism.
But, understanding the mechanism doesn't neutralize the terror for someone experiencing this nightly. If a listener is trapped in a cycle of severe recurring nightmare activity where the biological fire alarm and the psychological trauma are just constantly feeding off each other, how do clinical psychologists intervene? We can't just tell them to appreciate the avant-garde cinema.
No, definitely not. The clinical gold standard for intervening in severe nightmare disorders is called image rehearsal therapy, or IRT.
IRT.
It is a highly structured cognitive behavioral intervention that capitalizes on waking neuroplasticity to essentially rewrite the subconscious software.
Walk me through the actual mechanics of IRT. How does a listener take a nightmare like the Underground Dome and rewrite the code?
The protocol requires the patient to sit down in a state of calm, waking consciousness and write out the nightmare in exacting detail. They chart the narrative progression all the way up to the point of maximum emotional distress, the climax.
Okay.
But rather than writing the traumatic conclusion, they intentionally sever the original associative chain and author a completely new, safe, or empowering ending.
So for our dreamer, standing in the circle with the toothbrush as the muddy water rises, how do they hack that specific sequence?
They document the round room, the circle of integrated shadows, and the rising water. But they aggressively visualize a pivot. The muddy, viscous sludge rapidly clarifies. It transforms into warm, crystal-clear water infused with, say, eucalyptus or lavender.
It changes the environment.
Completely. The subterranean dome shifts into a relaxing thermal bathhouse. The writhing parasitic worms dissolve and are replaced by gentle therapeutic water jets. The armored tactical units remove their helmets and reveal themselves to be protective lifeguards.
Wow.
And the key is to repeatedly and intensely rehearse this new sensory data during the day.
You are essentially laying down new neural track while the prefrontal cortex is online, so the train can switch rails when it's offline.
That's a perfect analogy. You are providing the dream director with a new script. Through repeated conscious rehearsal, you alter the associative network. The next time the amygdala detects an apneic event or a spike in anxiety, instead of defaulting to the catastrophic drowning protocol, it reaches for the newly consolidated pathways of the thermal bath. And over time, the frequency and intensity of the nightmares degrade significantly.
We have mapped an unbelievable landscape today. We started in a hostile, commercialized bedroom with a father desecrating the secure base and a mother auctioning off oxidized potential.
We really went everywhere.
We did. We descended a brutalist concrete spiral into the gravity well of a sticky amphibian, sought false refuge in a transparent panopticon, and watched the laws of physics break down as inflamed walruses scaled the walls.
It's been a journey.
We navigated the vertical hierarchy of late-stage capitalism, witnessed the ultimate Jungian shadow integration, unpacked the displacement of a toothbrush, and finally realized the entire horror show was a desperate attempt by the brainstem to force the lungs to open.
It all comes back to biology.
The sheer computational power, the density of the metaphors, and the biological imperatives driving it all, it is a testament to the absolute brilliance of the human organism as a storytelling engine.
Because the subconscious is not a trash bin. It is the most sophisticated, real-time virtual reality simulator in existence, dedicated entirely to keeping the organism alive and psychologically integrated.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with. The next time you are violently ejected from sleep, drenched in sweat, heart pounding against your ribs, terrified by a narrative that defies all logic, do not just ask yourself what abstract fears are haunting you. Ask yourself what your physical hardware is demanding.
Is it the mind or is it the body?
Right. Are you truly drowning in the weight of your economic reality, or is your airway compromised? Are you being hunted by the ghosts of your past? Or is your body temperature plummeting because the window is open? The language of the mind is fiercely, relentlessly symbolic, but it is always tethered to your biology. You are the only one who holds the cipher to that language.
The investigation of your own internal architecture is never really finished. The answers are continuously broadcasting. You simply have to learn how to tune the receiver.
Keep interrogating the structures around you, and more importantly, keep interrogating the constructs within your own mind. Until next time.